And Jonathan Wilson of Manotick, Ontario, heard me broadcast that I needed a Canadian flag, so he sent me one up here. Man, that was some slingshot he used. Jonathan also wrote and said that if TVO cancels me, he's going to write and complain to them. Jonathan, I don't think you get the premise here. You see, they can't cancel me. I'm hijacking their signal. This is a pirate broadcast. The only way they can stop me is to try and jam me, which they appear to be doing now. Hello? Planet of the Apes is going to be a comic book again. Adventure Comics did a 4-issue miniseries. It was such a success, they've decided to revive it into an open-ended series. So it's going to go on as long as people are buying it. Now, why do I mention Planet of the Apes when we're supposed to be talking about Canadians? What, multiculturalism? No, no. As a matter of fact, the artist on the new episodes of Planet of the Apes is Kent Burrows, Canadian. Let's punch him up. Kent? Kent, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
It's Commander Rick. How's the Planet of the Apes project coming?
Great, Rick, take a look.
Oh, all right.
There it is.
This is some of the artwork you've been doing?
Yes, it is. A couple of pages from the first issue.
All right. When is this due out?
This will be out in April, I think. Late April.
And how many issues are you going to be doing?
Well, I'm doing the first 4, and I may be doing the next 4, too, all depending on how the gods and fate decide.
Now, what's the theme of the Planet of the Apes? Because what you're doing is set beyond the last movie even, isn't it? It's like 200 or 300 years beyond that?
Yeah, it's 200 years beyond the last movie, and but a lot of the same themes of a little bit of the social satire of the apes acting as the humans being inarticulate, stupid creatures, and all of the role reversal sort of things that went on in the first movie will be coming through, except with a different cast of characters in these comics.
And who's doing the writing of the comic?
It's a man named Charles Marshall. He's an American writer.
And he writes, sends it. Have you met him, or how do you work this if you're up in Canada and he's down in the United States?
Well, we thank God for the courier services that we have around. I've never met him. I've talked to him briefly a few times, but he sends me a very detailed script and with lots of notes and little asides, and I work from his script.
Now, this is a tough question, but it's a question I think anyone who's interested in getting into the business would be asking. Are you paid in American dollars or Canadian dollars?
I am paid in American dollars, so I'm hoping to see the Canadian dollar fall right to the bottom.
Ah,
a little bit of a selfish reason.
And then you go out and buy the cars and things that you desperately need.
Yes, or food, anyway.
Food would be good, sure. I saw a story by you in Nexus. How did that come about?
Well, I had been at a convention in Chicago last year and talked to the people from First Comics who published Nexus.
Yeah.
And they said, we'd like to give you a story, a backup story. And they liked what I did on that, and so they continued and gave me 5 more parts to do. So I'm right in the middle of all of that right now.
Does it affect the fact that you're living in Canada? Does that bother the American comic book people or not at all?
Not at all. I don't even think they care, really, as long as you are capable and meet your deadlines and all those other things. I don't think that's a factor whatsoever. So
all those Canadian comic book creators, is there a common thread between them all? Not that I can see. But there is one common thing running through comic books, or that's been sustained in comic books, and that's a Canadian comic book hero, Wolverine, the berserker with the adamantium claws. Try looking up adamantium in your Sergeant Welch periodic table. Let's talk to the man who is currently drawing Wolverine. He's Dave Ross, a Canadian. Dave, can you hear me?
Hi, Rick.
It's Commander Rick up in space. Wanted to ask you, how's it going with the Wolverine comics? How far along are you?
It's just going ferociously, Rick, just ferociously.
You've been, for people who don't know about the Wolverine, can you give us sort of the thumbnail biography, the resume that he'd hand out?
Well, first of all, he is Canadian.
Yeah.
And he's a character that they came up with. I think his first appearance was in a 2-part Hulk story.
They being who?
Oh, Marvel Comics. I better throw that in very quickly.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, he then carried on to become a permanent member of the X-Men, and the X-Men became one of the hottest-selling books in all of comicdom in North America.
And in the group of the X-Men, how would you describe his personality? What did he bring to the group?
Well, you summed it up quite well. Berserker. This guy had the animal fury in him, and I think a lot of the attraction for a lot of the readers was that this character would have that fury in him and be trying to control it and want to have the dignity of a normal human being at the same time, knowing that he would go into these rages now and then and act like a total wild man.
What sets the rages off?
Usually when he gets into some kind of a scrap and ends up getting hurt. Very often if he gets hurt early on in some kind of a tussle with these supervillains, then he'll go crazy.
Now, you do more that you've done a variety of things. You worked on Punisher, War Journal, a lot of other projects. It must be a real balancing act. I mean, how many projects are you working on right now, or are you just restricting yourself to Wolverine?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm working on more than one. I'm working on Wolverine, guest starring the Hulk, and that's a lot of fun because the Hulk's a really interesting character to work with. Also, I'm doing a Submariner series.
Now, what kind of problems do you run in as an artist working in Canada? I mean, you're not right in New York or Los Angeles, so you can't just knock on doors. You're stuck with couriers, things like that. What kind of problems do you run into?
Well, I think one of the problems that you run into is the inevitable deadline pressure. And I think deadline pressure is something that all of us comic book artists face because we're trying to put out books on a regular basis. To work in the industry, Rick, you have to be able to do at least a book a month. And when I talk about one book, I'm talking about 22 to 24 pages of comic book artwork, interior artwork each month, and probably cover thrown in as well.
Have you ever missed a deadline?
Honestly?
Yeah.
Sure. But the important thing...
How often have you missed a deadline?
Oh, only now and then. I usually hit them. Okay. But I think the key thing is, and with most of the editors I've run into in the comics business, if you're running into trouble, if it looks like you're going to be late on a deadline, the best bet is to let them know about it in advance. And you can always give them options. You can tell them, I've got this deadline problem. I think it's going to be X number of days late.
So now, in other words, you tried lying and that didn't work. Is that what you're saying?
That didn't work.
Okay, let's check out the old electronic mailbag. Got a little care package sent to me by Jacques Levin. Jacques, the artist on Kitchen Sink's Melodies comic series. Melodies, the autobiography of Quebec stripper Sylvie Roncoeur. And in letter, Jacques says that he's a big fan of Commander Rick. He sends me a little cartoon that he's drawn, actually a very funny cartoon. Thanks a lot, Jacques. I'm a big fan of yours, big fan of Melody as well. Oh, got some mail from below the 49th parallel. Well, to me, everything's below the 49th parallel. Charles Thompson Jr. from Inkster, Minnesota. He says he's been receiving my broadcast for several weeks, and he doesn't want me to change a thing about it. Well, I'm sorry, but I do have to change some things about it. Otherwise, I'm just talking about Clive Barker week after week after week, and, you know, people start to memorize it, and then they start doing it better than I do. He also writes, among the mainstream and avant-garde subjects you deal with, why nothing about the goings-on involving the new Star Trek series? All right, Charles, calm down, give yourself a Vulcan nerve pinch, settle back. We're going to get to Star Trek as soon as I can. I've been actually sampling all sorts of information from the 4,000 channels that run through this station, and I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. Got another letter here from Jim McNair. He's the vice president of Star Trek Toronto, and Jim wants, yes, you guessed it, more Star Trek. Well, like I said, we're going to get to it. He also says he's starting a fan club for Quantum Leap, the TV show. He's calling it Quantum League. There's going to be auctions, parties, newsletters, meetings, and he says more. Oh, yeah. He's going to have his first scheduled meeting at the Spaced Out Library, March 24th, 1990. Okay, they're jamming me. So very quickly, is there a Canadian voice in science fiction, a Canadian style? I don't think so, because science fiction goes beyond the small things like nationalities and countries. Science fiction, in fact, shows us what we have in common with other races, other creeds, other colors. Even if that other race is Vulcan and the color is green. And as for science fiction, well, that's just all American.
Wednesday at 9:15 on Human